Sono le 23 di domenica 2 dicembre. Siamo nel 1984 e siamo a Bhopal, una città a 500 metri d'altezza, proprio nel bel mezzo dell'India. Questa è una data, un giorno e un'ora che segneranno per sempre la storia della città. Bhopal oggi ha quasi 2 milioni e mezzo di abitanti, con una prospettiva che la porterà da qui al 2035 ad averne quasi 3 milioni e mezzo. Nel 1969 invece gli abitanti erano solo 350.000. Proprio nel 1969 una società statunitense, la Union Carbide, decise di costruire una fabbrica di insetticidi, proprio a Bhopal. Venne creata una società che si chiama la Union Carbide India Limited, partecipata al 50,9% dalla società madre, la Union Carbide Corporation. Il restante era partecipato da azionisti indiani, compreso il governo. Nella fabbrica si produceva il Sevin. Il Sevin era un insetticida abbondantemente usato negli anni 70. Già all'inizio degli anni 80 però la domanda di Sevin calò, motivo per cui la Union Carbide nel novembre del 1984 prese la decisione di smantellare la fabbrica di Bhopal. Voleva portare alcuni pezzi in paesi in via di sviluppo, che sia l'Indonesia o il Brasile. Solo pochi giorni dopo la decisione della Union Carbide di dismettere la fabbrica, però esattamente alle ore 23 del 2 dicembre 1984, un operatore si accorse che nella fabbrica c'era una piccola perdita di gas. Questo gas era il metilisocianato, abbreviato MIC. A causa di una valvola non funzionante, nel serbatoio 610 una tonnellata d'acqua era entrata in contatto con 40 tonnellate di MIC. Questo scatenò una reazione isotermica che fece aumentare la temperatura e la pressione. Noi sappiamo che nella fabbrica la manutenzione era già molto scarsa, negli anni c'erano già state diverse fuoriuscite di materiale e anche gli allarmi, quelli automatici, di fatto, per non creare apprensione, erano stati disattivati. Questa fu una concatenazione di eventi che portò al più grave disastro industriale della storia. Nel 1984, la notte tra il 2 e il 3 dicembre del 1984, quindi 40 anni fa, a Bhopal morirono 3.787 persone. La causa fu chiara da subito: la fuga di 42 tonnellate di isocianato di metile dalla fabbrica della Union Carbide India Limited. L'organizzazione non governativa The Bhopal Medical Appeal ci dice che in quel periodo morirono più di 15.000 persone. Noi abbiamo intervistato Rachna Dhingra, che è un'attivista e la coordinatrice dell'International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, che è un'associazione composta da volontari e da sopravvissuti che chiedono giustizia ancora dopo 40 anni.
What happened the 3rd of December of the 1984 in Bhopal?
2nd December 1984, about 27 tons of methyl isocyanate leaked from this pesticide plant, killing more than 8,000 people within the 3 days and injuring over 500,000 people. MIC entered the bloodstream of people who inhaled it, and it caused damage to their eyes, lungs, brain, the immune system, and the reproductive system. I mean, things were so bad that people were not told not to run. Even if the PA system was working, it could have alerted people to not run in the direction of wind. So the faster they ran, the faster they died in their own body fluids. More than 25,000 people have died as a result of that single day exposure. And the corporations responsible for it, especially Union Carbide and its owner, now new owner called Dow Chemical, have not been held to account even for a day. So this was, even though it happened 40 years ago, its ramifications continue today, 40 years later, not only in the people who were directly exposed, but children being born to those people.
Which were the environmental and medical consequences of the disaster of Bhopal?
This was not just only, the worst industrial disaster. It is also, the world's biggest corporate massacre, and there is a environmental disaster unfolding as we speak. There are persistent organic pollutants and heavy metals that have been found in mothers' breast milk, that have been found into the groundwater, and the corporations responsible for the cleanup continues to refuse to clean this up. But at the end of the day, we have a global toxic hotspot in the middle of the city of Bhopal, where about 200,000 people who live around the factory, whose groundwater is contaminated, and there are huge number of people, children being born with birth defects living in this area because of the contaminated water that their mothers ingested.
And what is International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal doing? What's the story?
So ICJB, the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, is a coalition of survivors organizations that have been fighting for justice and life of dignity of people who have been exposed to the poisons of Union Carbide and of Dow Chemical. Working on the medical aspect is also something that ICJB does, and on the legal aspect and on the side of corporate accountability, because even though 40 years have passed, there is not a single corporation or a single individual that has been really punished for this. Corporations and their officials have literally gotten away with murder, and that is things that ICJB does, that fights for legal justice for with people who have been affected. Another thing we wanted people to know, that for this disaster that has caused lifelong injuries in people. In fact, in the times of the pandemic, during the COVID times, 3 times more gas victims, people who had been exposed to MIC, died when compared to those who were not exposed to MIC. So all the injuries that people have suffered, all they have gotten is $500 as compensation for lifelong injuries, and $2,000 for deaths. So that is also one thing that ICJB tries to do, is to see how we can seek appropriate compensation for the long-term damages of people exposed. And today, there are about more than 100,000 people who continue to suffer from chronic illnesses. And then the medical care is extremely lacking, because there are lack of doctors and specialists in the hospitals meant to provide treatment to Bhopal gas victims. But no one, not a single person or a corporation, held accountable for the world's worst industrial and a corporate massacre, whatever you call justice or reparations, like all these bodies, UN and international courts, have not worked. So this Henry Kissinger was one of the people who got the loan sanctioned from from the U.S. banks, and had this Union Carbide factory set up. So, someone actually predicted the disaster even before it happened, yeah? The cost cutting was deliberate. These were all decisions taken in the boardroom where they thought it was okay to shut down the refrigeration system to save something like $42 a day, right? So this is how less the human life in India was valued, and that is when you look at it, and that is, when you see $500 being paid as compensation to people, and it only costed 43 cents per share for Union Carbide. So that people were considered expendable, and corporate greed and profit maximization, profit being put before people's health and environment.
I would like to ask you a last question, Rachna. Why Bhopal matters?
Bhopal matters because unless and until there is justice in Bhopal, the message that we have, powerful people, powerful corporations can come by, collude with their politicians, set up factories, maim, pollute, know that some chemical is dangerous and still produce because it's profitable. Bhopal matters because it is a case study for all the worst reasons for how justice has not been done. Yeah, for how profits have been put before people's health and environment. And a lot of environmental injustice and racism also plays a big part in that.
Isocianato di metile. Leggiamo direttamente da un report dell'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità. Tra gli effetti a breve termine, la sostanza è severamente irritante per gli occhi, la cute e il tratto respiratorio. È corrosiva in caso di ingestione. L'inalazione di vapore può provocare edema polmonare. L'inalazione può provocare reazioni di tipo asmatico. L'esposizione potrebbe provocare morte. Non va meglio per quelli a lungo termine. La sostanza può avere effetto sul tratto respiratorio. Provoca tossicità per la riproduzione e lo sviluppo umano. A raccontarci direttamente i danni che può provocare l'isocianato di metile è Rashida Bee, un'attivista e superstite della tragedia di Bhopal che nel 2004 ha vinto il Goldman Environmental Prize. Noi l'abbiamo raggiunta e adesso ci racconta l'accaduto.
How did your life change after that moment?
उस रात के बाद आपकी जिंदगी कैसे बदली?
उसके बाद 2 दिसंबर 84 के बाद जो गैस का घर के हालात हुए कि काम की क्षमता खो चुके थे लोग, अपना काम नहीं कर पाते थे, घर में खाने पीने की मुश्किल थी और हम पर्दे में रहते थे, कभी बाहर नहीं निकले थे कि अचानक ये चीजें सामने आई तो अब क्या करें, कैसे जिंदगी गुजारे। तो उस बात के लिए हम बाहर निकले तो वहां पे कुछ काम वगैरह दिया जा रहा था। वो काम के लिए जब गए तो देखा तो वहां पे 100 महिलाएं थी, 50 हिंदू 50 मुस्लिम महिलाओं को लिया गया था। सब मुस्कुराना भूल चुके थे, हर एक के आंसू, आंख में आंसू थे। किसी का बेटा खत्म हुआ था, किसी का पति खत्म हुए थे, किसी के भाई खत्म हुए थे। इस तरह से हालात थे कि वो देख के ऐसा लगा कि हमें इस जिंदगी में कुछ बदलाव करना चाहिए और जिस कंपनी ने जहर फैलाए उसके खिलाफ हमें लड़ना चाहिए।
I wanted also to ask what does it mean for a woman to organize a big march such as the March on New Delhi that you organized in the 1989, and also to organize the first female trade union in Bhopal. What does it mean for a woman living in Bhopal in that period?
इसके मायने यही हो सकते हैं कि महिला को जब कोई परेशानी होती है और वो कोई चीज सोच लेती है कि हमें ये करना है। हमने जिंदगी में कभी दिल्ली देखी नहीं थी, दिल्ली का सिर्फ नाम सुना था, लेकिन जब हमने देखा कि हमें यहाँ इंसाफ नहीं मिल रहा है, 27 दिन तक हम बैठे रहे और वो सरकार से मांग करते रहे कि भोपाल के लोगों को इलाज, रोजगार और पुनर्वास का कार्य शुरू किया जाए। सरकार सुनने को तैयार नहीं थी। तो अचानक ही हम लोगों ने ये फैसला लिया कि हम लोगों को पैदल दिल्ली जाना चाहिए और पद यात्रा करते हुए जाएं ताकि दुनिया को समझ में आ सके कि भोपाल में कितनी मुसीबतें के साथ ये जिंदगी जी रहे हैं, उनको इंसाफ मिलना चाहिए, दुनिया भी हमारे साथ आए। और उस टाइम तो ना मोबाइल थे, ना फोन थे, कुछ भी नहीं था और जंगलों का एरिया था और कभी दिल्ली देखी नहीं थी। लेकिन जब सोच लिया कि जाना है तो सारी महिलाएं ने तैयारी की कि जब आपने कहा है तो हम चलेंगे। जब ये ट्रेड यूनियन का बनाने का, हम पढ़े लिखे हैं नहीं, हमें किसी ने बताया कि जहाँ पे 20 महिलाएं बैठ के काम करते, 20 मजदूर, तो वहाँ ट्रेड यूनियन बनाई जाती है, वहाँ पे फैक्ट्री एक्ट लागू होता है। तो हमने कहा ट्रेड यूनियन कहाँ रजिस्ट्रेशन होती है, हम लोगों ने कहा कि यूनियन अगर आपकी बन जाएगी तो आपको आपके हक मिल जाएंगे, आप यूनियन बना लीजिए। तो उस बात को लेकर हम लोगों ने पता लगाया कि दीदी ने और हमने कि कहाँ बनेगी, उनका इंदौर जाना है। हम दोनों इंदौर गए, इंदौर से लिखा पढ़ी दूसरे से करवाई और उन्होंने फिर अपने ट्रेड यूनियन रजिस्ट्रेशन करा के दिया और उसके तहत हम लोग लड़े। तो वाकई यूनियन की ताकत से हम लोग जो भी लड़ाई लड़ रहे थे उसमें हमें ताकत मिली। जब पदयात्रा की थी तो उस टाइम मुश्किलों का सामना हुआ। जंगलों से निकले लोगों ने हमें बताया था कि आधी मर जाएंगी, आधी जिंदा लौटेंगी, लेकिन हमने कहा था कि नहीं, ऐसा नहीं होता है, ये महिलाओं का हौसला है। महिलाएं इज्जत के साथ जिंदा दिल्ली पहुंचेंगी और प्रधानमंत्री से मिलेंगे और प्रधानमंत्री से अपनी बात रखेंगे। तो 1 महीना 3 दिन में हम पहुंचे। बहुत कुछ मुश्किलों का सामना करना पड़ा। उसके बाद जंगल में डाकू भी मिले। डाकुओं ने, सबने कहा था डाकू लूट लेंगे, लेकिन डाकुओं ने हमारी बहुत सगी बहनों से ज्यादा, उन्होंने भाइयों से ज्यादा हमें मोहब्बत दी। उन्होंने हम लोगों को एक दिन का खाना खिलाया और बच्चों के लिए दूध मंगवाया, दूध पिलाया और डाकुओं का ऐसा लगा जैसे सगे भाई से बहनें मिल रही हैं। उन्होंने हमें बहुत इस्तकबाल के साथ दिल्ली के लिए रवाना किया और रास्ते में ये जंगलों में से जब निकले तो भूख प्यास से सामना करना पड़ा। एक पैसा हमारे पास नहीं था। 100 महिलाएं थी, 1-1 2-2 रुपए लेके निकली थी, किसी के पास कुछ नहीं था। तो किसी ने जब बच्चे दूध के लिए रोए भूखे प्यासे, किसी ने अपनी पायल बेच दी, किसी ने अपना मंगलसूत्र बेच दिया, लेकिन पीछे कोई नहीं हटी। सारी महिलाओं ने ठान लिया था कि हमें दिल्ली पहुंचना है। दिल्ली पहुंचे, लेकिन राजीव गांधी नहीं मिले। उसके बाद प्राइम मिनिस्टर तो नहीं मिले। राजीव गांधी के पास से खबर आई कि वो पेरिस जा रहा है, 15 दिन के बाद मिलेंगे। तो फिर यहाँ के मुख्यमंत्री ने बताया कि आप भोपाल चलो और आपको सभी कुछ हम देंगे, और देश पीड़ितों को रोजगार, इलाज, पुनर्वास करेंगे, और जो भी आपकी मांग है वो हम पूरी करेंगे, आप भोपाल वापस चलो। तो हम लोग ये समझते थे कि मंत्री झूठ नहीं बोलते हैं। हमने उनकी बात का यकीन करते हुए वापस आ गए। 1989 से लेके आज तक फिर दोबारा मोतीलाल वोरा जो मुख्यमंत्री थे वो नहीं मिले।
I would like to ask you a last question. What we can do as people not living in India for Bhopal after 40 years?
भोपाल के लिए सबसे बड़ी अच्छी बात है कि वहाँ की महिलाएं एक साथ आए और डाव कंपनी के खिलाफ आवाज उठाएं कि डाव केमिकल जहां भी है वो भोपाल की जिम्मेदारी ले और भोपाल को इंसाफ दे, ताकि भोपाल के लोग जो आने वाली पीढ़ी है वो बच सके, और जो है दुनिया में अभी वो इज्जत की जिंदगी जी सके। उसके लिए डाव केमिकल को जिम्मेदारी लेना चाहिए। इसके लिए अगर भोपाल की हमारी बहनें आवाज उठाएंगी,
ये लोग
हाँ, जो आप लोग हैं, आपके साथी हैं, वो इस आवाज को उठाएं। इटली में अगर हम इटली गए भी हैं, इटली बुलाया गया था हमें, हम इटली गए थे, और वहां पे हमने ये बात रखी थी, और अभी आपके सामने भी रख रहे हैं कि आप लोग सब मिलके अगर डाव केमिकल के खिलाफ आवाज उठाएंगे कि भोपाल को इंसाफ मिलेगा, तभी हम आपको कहीं कोई काम कर, रोजगार करने देंगे। तो उम्मीद है कि भोपाल को इंसाफ मिल पाएगा।
Questo è quello che ci hanno detto dal Bhopal Medical Appeal, cioè un'associazione che dal 1996 offre assistenza medica gratuita a tutte quelle persone che sono state colpite dagli effetti del gas della Union Carbide. Offre però assistenza anche a tutte quelle famiglie che ancora oggi esistono e vivono a Bhopal, perché a Bhopal ancora è in corso un avvelenamento dell'acqua.
Tim Edwards, which are the short-term effects of the MIC exposure on human health?
So the chemical that leaked in Bhopal, there were approximately 28 tons in weight of the chemical that was in gas form that spread out of the factory and floated southwards into the city. The factory was less than 1 mile from the main train station. So it floated directly into very densely populated areas of the city. Its safety threshold, according to the US Environmental Protection Agency, 0.02 parts per million. That's significantly more strict than the safety threshold for example, hydrogen cyanide, which was the chief toxin in the gas Zyklon B used during the Holocaust. Its sensitivity is around 200 times higher than hydrogen cyanide. What appears to have killed people in the first few days is something known as pulmonary edema. It's a consequence of the body fighting to flush out toxins in the lungs and producing heavy amounts of liquid in the lungs. And that liquid becomes so intense that a person drowns in their own bodily fluid. So that was the primary cause of death over the first few days. Union Carbide Corporation, which majority owned the factory in Bhopal, would claim over the next months that MIC, methyl isocyanate exposure, only impacted the surface tissues of the lungs, the surface tissues of the eyes, and did not cross the lung barrier and get into the bloodstream, because the company was very concerned about minimizing tiers of liability. If the poisons had crossed into the bloodstream, then you're looking at a completely different situation in terms of civil compensation and potential criminal penalties, because it's obvious that if a poison is in the bloodstream, it's going to go around the body and it's going to damage different organs. That's exactly what happened. So the MIC is known to have crossed the pulmonary barrier. It's thought to have formed a conjugate with a protein called glutathione and been sort of taxied, ferried around the body. But it was an unstable conjugation. So at points, the conjugation broke apart and the toxin was dumped into different parts of the body. So the brain, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the organs, essentially. And that has led to multi-systemic illnesses among Bhopal gas survivors that continue to this day. There are many statistics about the long-term impacts, but essentially chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that makes survivors 3 times more likely to contract communicable diseases like tuberculosis. It goes on and on. Because there were genomic impacts as well, and cytogenetic impacts, quite apart from the susceptibility to cancer, breaks and gaps in chromosomes were observed in certain studies, and it seems that this has led to a spate of congenital abnormalities. In other words, defects and growth disorders affecting second and third generations of people born within gas-exposed families. In the 1990s, the state government conducted surveys on around 70,000 children born in gas-affected families and found that almost 2,500 of those children had congenital heart defects alone, regardless of any other problems they might have faced. There is no statutory healthcare provision for them. They have never received any compensation for the injuries that they suffer. The manifestations of their illnesses are neurodevelopmental delays, growth disorders. They're often shorter in height with smaller skull circumference. There might be direct physical abnormalities as well. It's an epidemic of problems. These children are falling completely under the radar. So Union Carbide Corporation didn't have to pay a single cent for their care, and the government is making no provision for them either. It's one of the things that makes the work of the Bhopal Medical Appeal so important. So we provide core funding to an organization called Chingari Trust, that runs a rehabilitation center for damaged children in Bhopal. They are seeing over 200 children every day and providing them with a range of therapies. There are over 1,000 children registered with Chingari, so there's a lot of need that they aren't able to meet, but we are able to support a number of children. They're given physiotherapy, educational therapy, sports therapy, music therapy, speech therapy. Special education has helped dozens of them to enter mainstream schools, and they're really the sole source of not just therapeutic support, but also social support for the families who are burdened with the care of heavily disabled children.
Evident that there were short-term effects in the past, but now the long-term effects are really evident on human health. And Tim Edwards, I would like to ask you a last question, which is now, today, in this moment, the situation in Bhopal?
I first went to Bhopal 25 years ago now, and at that time it was common for survivors to say that the situation was as bad, if not worse, in the city than it was in the days immediately after the gas leak. I mean, such was the health epidemic there. In many ways, little has changed for the better. There are over 400,000 survivors visiting gas relief hospitals every single year, seeking pain relief, seeking solutions to evolving health problems such as diabetes and hypertension, cardiovascular issues, and gynecological problems and cancers. The mainstay of the response in state hospitals has been the same for 40 years. It's been prescription of painkillers, antibiotics, steroids, drops for the eyes, effectively symptomatic treatments. What the Sambhavna Trust has tried to do, the clinic that was set up initially with money that was raised in the UK from ordinary people across the country, is set up a model of healthcare which has as its binding principle, first do no harm. In other words, don't add to the toxic load in the bodies of people who've already taken on, not just environmentally taken on toxins, but also pharmaceutically through an overuse and overprescription of quite heavy medication. So Sambhavna has pioneered a combination of modern medicine and Ayurvedic Indian medicine and yoga therapies, and has really successfully alleviated the suffering of thousands of people from the worst affected communities, and all completely free of charge. At the moment, Sambhavana is only able to receive donations from Indian citizens and people living in India, but it's doing absolutely vital work, and it's absolutely essential that it continues to be able to provide that service, because without Sambhavana's model, there is really nothing to guide the health authorities in the city in terms of improving and developing, the health outcomes of the people who are under their care.
Per capire quanto sia attuale la tragedia del 1984, andiamo a leggere uno studio pubblicato su BMJ Open nel 2023, quando i ricercatori hanno cercato di quantificare i danni attuali che la tragedia del 1984 sta avendo sulla popolazione di Bhopal. Ecco, i ricercatori hanno provato a stimare gli effetti sulla salute della fuga di gas tra le persone tra i 15 e i 49 anni che vivevano nel Madhya Pradesh nel 2015 e nel 2016, così come i loro figli nati tra il 1981 e il 1985. L'analisi dei dati ha mostrato che ci sono stati chiari effetti intergenerazionali a lungo termine. Gli uomini che all'epoca erano nel grembo materno, cioè nel 1984, e le cui madri vivevano proprio a Bhopal o addirittura nel raggio di 100 km dalla fabbrica della Union Carbide, avevano maggiori probabilità di avere una disabilità in grado di influire sulla loro occupazione lavorativa 15 anni dopo. Più di 30 anni dopo, gli uomini che non si erano mai trasferiti avevano anche un rischio di cancro 27 volte maggiore rispetto agli adulti nati prima del disastro, oppure agli adulti che non erano vicini alla fabbrica. Tra le madri, invece, che vivevano in un raggio entro i 100 km da Bhopal, la percentuale di parti maschili è scesa dal 64% tra il 1981 e il 1984 al 60% nel 1985. Ecco, una differenza questa che è inesistente tra le donne che vivevano a più di 100 km durante lo stesso periodo. Cosa significa questo? Significa che i fetti maschili sono stati maggiormente suscettibili rispetto alle femmine ai fattori di stress. Quali sono i fattori di stress? I fattori di stress ambientali. Bhopal rappresenta ancora oggi il più grave disastro chimico-industriale della storia. Questo per gravità degli effetti, per estensione territoriale di questi effetti, ma anche, come abbiamo visto fino ad ora, per estensione temporale degli effetti stessi. Ancora oggi, ancora dopo 40 anni, se ne subiscono le conseguenze.